What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about why you should not let your kids be drinking energy drinks, whether it's before sports or before training or just at any point throughout the day. So I find it mildly insane that we actually have to have this conversation, but energy drinks are not great for kids. I've got kids that walk through my doors every day drinking some kind of energy drink. I know it's not the first one they're drinking. I know they're having multiple throughout the day. I know they drink them before they play. I had a 10-year-old in one of my groups ask me what my favorite flavor of C4 was, and then proceeded to tell me what his favorite flavor was. So I think we need to have this conversation so that you can understand, that there are some benefits to caffeine in these energy drinks, but there's a lot of downside to it too. And it's not just the physical downside. There's a lot of neurological, emotional, psychological issues that can come from these young developing brains living on caffeine. On top of that, I hate to tell you, but if you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you need extra energy, life's going to be hard for you, because right now you've got more energy than you'll ever have for the rest of your life, and most kids have more energy than they actually need. So we'll go over some of the benefits of caffeine, and energy drinks, and then the majority of what we're going to talk about today is going to be the detriments of this energy drink usage, especially with young developing brains. All right, so we're going to start out this episode by talking about caffeine. The reason we're going to talk about caffeine, because in addition to being the most widely consumed drug on the planet, and it is a drug, it's in every single one of these energy drinks, whether it's pre-workout, whether it's, designed or marketed to get you bigger or to give you energy or to help you lose weight. Caffeine is in all of them. There's a reason for that, and that reason is there are numerous studies, right? So caffeine's probably the second most studied supplement right behind creatine on the planet, as far as performance enhancement and health and things like that go. And there are plenty of studies to show the efficacy of caffeine as a performance enhancer. So you need energy, you need better performance. We're going to dump some caffeine into this because it's scientifically proven, it's mostly safe, and people like the way it makes them feel. In addition to the energy, you get that little dopamine hit. Makes you happy, makes you a little addicted. You'll buy more of their product, and that's one of the reasons that it goes in there. But what is caffeine? What does it do, right? A lot of people think caffeine's this big CNS stimulant and it wakes us up. In reality, that's not really the case. Caffeine really has three functions within the body. There are two that we don't really think contribute to this energy development or creation of energy, because they've only been demonstrated when they're taken at toxic levels. Not toxic that it necessarily kills us, but toxic in the sense that, throwing you into panic attacks, heart arrhythmias, tachycardia, all the fun stuff associated with what we would consider anxious behavior. And those two things are, dealing with CAMP or CAMP, and dealing with permeability of the cell membrane so calcium can go through it. Those two things are kind of outside the scope of this talk today. So what we are going to talk about is that third thing that caffeine does, and that's the fact that it's an adenosine receptor antagonist. Now it sounds like a mouthful, but basically what it does is you have these adenosine receptors inside your body, and your body produces adenosine throughout the day. We have very low levels in the morning, and then as the day goes on, we start to produce more and more and more, and that's what signals your body to get tired. Caffeine comes in and binds to those receptors so that this adenosine can't. Now, when adenosine binds to these receptors, it releases some proteins that essentially signal your body. It inhibits some neural pathways and things like that, but it signals your body to get tired or be drowsy or to move a little bit slower. And that's why as the day goes on, we get more tired. We reach for more caffeine so we can bind to those receptors so that we don't get tired. But that's caffeine's job, right? It doesn't actually give us energy, and I think that's a very common misconception when it comes to caffeine. It actually keeps us from getting tired, and that's a really important differentiator here, because when we go to talk about the utilization of these energy drinks with young kids, I think it's important to understand that that's what's happening, and it's not necessarily like a creation of energy. It's not even really a conservation of energy. It's just suppressing the things inside our body that make us tired. All right, so we're mostly going to be talking about energy drinks today, but pre-workout also kind of falls into this mix. They don't just have caffeine. The focus is going to be a lot on caffeine today because that's in all of them. You've got like Red Bull that has caffeine and then some B vitamins and not really much else. You've got Bang and C4 that are dumping all kinds of other stuff into their products. Back when I was growing up, NO Explode was like a huge one, and like arginine alpha-ketoglutarate was like the big pre-workout thing. That went in everything. And then all the studies show that doesn't work at all. But one thing I will say is I swear to God, the AAKG, right, the arginine alpha-ketoglutarate, like when that wasn't in the pre-workout products, like I didn't get as good of a pump. So whatever the mechanism is behind it, they say it increases like nitric oxide in the bloodstream to help vasodilate. I don't know if like the studies say that it did not do that, right? So there may be some other kind of mechanism, but I know that the arginine like worked for me and it worked for a ton of people. So take that for whatever it's worth. I think we should start putting arginine back in these things. I think it's it's part of creatine. It's there's a lot of function of arginine within the body. But yeah. So anyways, yeah, Jack 3D, right, which actually had let me pull it up here. All right, it had DMAA and DMHA, right? And these are kind of like amphetamines. This was perfectly legal for a few reasons, but we had kids taking these essentially like legal versions of methamphetamines. It's probably not the best thing for them. And while those things are now illegal to go into supplements, I do think that there's a big downfall to ingesting so much caffeine, especially when your brain's still developing. If we get so amped up that we're super anxious, and we'll go over some of these side effects in a minute here, when our brains are still developing, I can imagine this is going to wire your kids to be anxious for the rest of their lives. They've already got social media that's like increasing their anxiety levels. They've got isolation that's increasing their anxiety levels. They've got all these pressures to perform and live a life that is worthy of being on social media and getting likes and things like that. I don't know that dumping a bunch of caffeine into their bodies and having them live in like a high anxiety type life is the best thing for them moving forward. In addition to that, most of these kids already have so much energy already. I don't know if you've been around like 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. They're bouncing off the walls. They're screaming. They're running around. They're very hard to kind of, get into, to corral them. It's like herding cats at times. So dumping a bunch of caffeine in them is going to make it that much harder for them to focus. We've got an epidemic of young boys being put on ADHD medications, and we're still giving them caffeine, and we're giving them, red food dyes and things like that. It's a whole nother conversation. But, adding this caffeine into their day with the promise of giving them a little bit of energy and a performance boost, I think is an exercise in futility. All right, so we're going to go over some of the neurological and psychological side effects of this caffeine use that's been demonstrated in kids. I pulled all of this from like a meta study that looked over many different studies. So there's a lot of information here. I'll link it in the description of the video and the podcast. But most of these, just understand, to start this off, most of these side effects kind of occur when we're at that 200 milligram or above benchmark here. And that's important to know too, because that's about what goes in every single energy drink, right? We're somewhere between 150 and 300. You're talking about a cup of coffee, just a regular cup of coffee, having somewhere between probably 100 and 150. You've got most sodas, like a can of soda, which nobody really drinks cans anymore when they're out and about. They're probably going to grab that 16-ounce bottle. So multiply this by like 1.25. Anywhere from like 45 to 70 milligrams of caffeine. So with a 16-ounce bottle, 20-ounce bottle, you're probably looking closer to 100 or so. You have two of them, and boom, you're in that that 200 milligram territory. So anxiety, insomnia, gastro issues, muscle twitching, inexhaustibility, right, which is different from having energy. There's 4 recognized caffeine psychiatric disorders in the DSM-5, and they're loss of appetite, tachycardia, cardiac arrhythmias, let me scale that back. This is one of them. This is caffeine intoxication. These are some of the symptoms of that. So again, we have loss of appetite, we have tachycardia, we have cardiac arrhythmia, muscle twitching, and rambling flow of thought or speech. So if you've ever seen somebody who looks like they're kind of manic, right, and they're not somebody who deals with bipolar or somebody who's like a cocaine addict, more than likely they've had entirely too much caffeine. So caffeine intoxication is the first one. The second one's going to be caffeine-induced anxiety, right? We can talk about that a little bit. I'm sure you've had it before. You ever had too much caffeine and then all of the sudden, like, you get, I hate this word, you get triggered by something and then all of a sudden your heart just races, right? Maybe you're expecting a phone call from your boss to like ream you out, and you've been dreading looking at your phone. All of a sudden the phone goes off and boom, heart rate's 170, right? And it's probably because you've had a ton of caffeine. Caffeine-induced sleep disorder, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then caffeine use disorder, which caffeine use disorder is just like a cute way of saying you're addicted to caffeine, right? That you would have actual physical and mental or emotional, I guess, withdrawals if you were to cease using caffeine. So this caffeine-induced sleep disorder, one of the biggest things here, the reason for this is that there is a half-life to caffeine, right? So when you take caffeine, it doesn't just go in and start like breaking down immediately. Caffeine has a half-life of somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. So if we take caffeine, let's say we have a 300 milligrams, right? We do that at 10 in the morning. Now let's go, most of you guys are waking up kind of earlier. Let's say 8 o'clock in the morning by the time it's done, right? You grab your energy drink or your cup of coffee and you're done drinking it by 8 a.m. That caffeine, right, that 300 milligrams, by the time we get to noon, is still 150 milligrams, right? So that's what a half-life is. Over the course of this half-life, it will be half of the chemical or whatever we've taken into our body, half of it will be left in that time, right? So right around noon, let's just say it's 4 hours. Around noon, you're still going to have 150 milligrams of caffeine. Around 4, you're going to have 75 milligrams of caffeine. Around 8 p.m., you're going to have about 37.5, 35, give or take, milligrams of caffeine. And that's if you've taken no other caffeine throughout the day, right? And this has some implications when it comes to playing sports. All right, so let's paint a picture here. You've got a kid that's playing in a tournament on the weekend. They play on a Friday night, right? First game, 7 p.m. on a Friday night, all right? They're unlucky in the sense that you guys got to be back at the rink at 6:30 the next morning for a 7:30 a.m. game, or not at the rink, but wherever you decide to play. My brain just goes straight to hockey. So they take let's say they drink a Bang, right? A Bang's going to have about 250 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. They drink this before the game. Let's say they're done drinking it at 6:30. They drink it between 6 and 6:30. They've got this 300 milligrams of caffeine. That game's about an hour long. All right, from 6:30 to 10:30, they're hovering around that 300 milligrams. At 10:30, they've still got 150 milligrams of caffeine left in their system, right? And what did we talk about before? Caffeine keeps you from getting tired. It doesn't give you energy. It just prohibits you from being able to relax. So now at 10:30, right, it's bedtime. They need to sleep, and they can't because they have all this caffeine in them. Around 2:30 in the morning, they're still dealing with like the fact that they just had a soda's worth of caffeine, right, in their bloodstream still at 2:30 in the morning. And this is bad news because we have to play. We got to be back at the rink or the arena at 6:30 in the morning to play a 7:30 game. So now they're asleep, right, but they are not getting good sleep. There's a big difference between like getting your proper REM cycles and deep sleep cycles and light sleep. There's all the difference in the world between getting those and not getting those. We can be asleep for 8 hours, and I'm sure it's happened to you. You ever sleep for 8 hours and you just woke up and felt exhausted, right? Like you didn't sleep at all. A lot of like caffeine can create that kind of environment. There are other things as well, but caffeine can do that. So your kid played that game, right, and didn't actually get any really good sleep or restorative sleep. So now they're waking up and they're exhausted. What do? What's the first thing they're going to do? Man, I need more caffeine, right? Because I am exhausted. So they're going to take that caffeine before the game, right? And we're dealing with this for the rest of the day because after they get done with that 7:30 a.m. game, you're going to be playing a 2 or 3 p.m. game, right? And what's going to happen then? They didn't get that sleep. They're exhausted. They're going to reach for more caffeine. And by the time the end of the weekend comes, they're broken down, exhausted. They're not getting good restorative sleep. And then they've got to go to school on Monday. And it's like they never relaxed at all for the entirety of the weekend. Coupled with that, caffeine actually like readies glycogen to be released from the liver. So it actually keeps the liver from storing glycogen. And that's one of the main ways that we recover. So when you play sports, right, we create damage to the cell and there's a lot of metabolic byproduct, but we expend a lot of glycogen and sugars from the bloodstream. That's how we get our energy to create those muscle contractions. After a game, if you've ever heard like, oh, you got to eat something within an hour to recover. Well, that recover process is like reloading that glycogen. That's the biggest part of that recovery process, especially if you're going to be playing or doing something else within the next 12 hours. That caffeine, what was that? That caffeine is prohibiting that glycogen from being stored. So when they wake up the next morning, it's going to be really tough for them to continue going, right? So that was like a little bit of a rant. I didn't plan on going that place, but it kind of fit. Having caffeine during these tournament weekends is probably the worst thing that you could do, right? And it's not just for tournaments. Think about if your kids got practice on a Thursday night at 7:30, right? And they reach for that caffeine because they've had a long day or a long week and they're not getting good sleep because most kids don't get good sleep and they're not eating well, reaching for that caffeine. Now that cascade of events starts on a Thursday night. So they wake up for school on Friday and they feel awful. Maybe they have a high school game on Friday and they're not ready to play. They don't play the best way that they could. And it's all because they reach for this caffeine, a day earlier, possibly 2 days earlier. When it comes to these energy drinks and pre-workouts and things like that, we just have to be mindful of the long effects that they're going to have on our immediate performance, right? All right, so to go back through, again, the neurological and psychological side effects, right? These tend to happen above 200 milligrams. We have anxiety, right? Kids already have enough anxiety. So do human beings in general. We don't need to add to that. Insomnia, most of us don't get good sleep to begin with. There's no need to make that situation worse by reaching for caffeine, especially late in the day. We have gastro issues, right? That's issues with the stomach. That can be, that can create inflammation, which can create a whole cascade of events. We have muscle twitching. The reason that happens is like we can get dehydrated, and a lot of times a dehydrated muscle is more likely to twitch. The most common place to see it is kind of in the eye. I don't know if you've ever been really tired and not really drank enough water throughout the day or had too much caffeine, and your eye is like twitching right above. It's like your eyebrow almost. Very common to happen with, with caffeine use or over caffeine use. And then inexhaustibility, right? So inexhaustibility is different from having energy. It's the inability to become exhausted and tired, right? So that means that we don't get that good restorative sleep. The 4 recognized caffeine-induced psychiatric disorders by the DSM-5. We have caffeine intoxication, right? That's too much caffeine. That means that we have had toxic levels of caffeine. It's kind of like ODing. Most of the time it's not going to kill you, but it's very uncomfortable. Caffeine-induced anxiety, again, very common with people who have too much caffeine. A lot of us walking around an anxious mess throughout the day. We don't need to add to that, especially these kids. These kids are already anxious enough. Caffeine-induced sleep disorders, we talked about not being able to recover and get that restorative sleep, but it can actually just prohibit you from falling asleep altogether. And then we have caffeine use disorder. And again, that's just a cute way of saying that you're literally physically and emotionally addicted to caffeine. All right, so we went over some of the neurological, like kind of emotional side effects. There's not as many physical side effects, but they are pretty pronounced when they do happen. For one, it's a diuretic, right? So if you know what a diuretic is, it makes you lose water. It messes with our electrolyte balance. It can make you dehydrated. Mauro Di Pasquale in Amino Acids and Proteins for the Athlete wrote about how just a 5% decrease in being dehydrated 5%, right, which doesn't seem like all that much, can really, really, really inhibit what's called anabolism. So we have, within our metabolism, we have catabolism and we have anabolism, right? Catabolism is being like in a catabolic state. If you've been familiar with like gym bro and gym science terms, you don't want to be in a catabolic state. That's a state of breakdown. That's where your body is breaking down things in an effort to give you energy. We want to be in what's called an anabolic state, right? Which you may know from the word anabolic steroids. Anabolism is the process within our metabolism of building, right? So we want to be in that anabolic state. Being dehydrated as little as 5% can really inhibit that anabolism from happening. It almost shuts it off. So if we're walking around dehydrated throughout the day when we should be recovering, right, we're not going to be able to recover the way that we want, and that's going to kind of inhibit the gains, right? We won't recover. We won't be able to, play, especially for kids like during their season. They're not going to be able to play the way they want. They're not going to be able to train the way they want. Will they recover? Yes, this is not going to mean that they have caffeine and all of a sudden they're dehydrated and they're never going to recover. It just really, really, really slows down the process. And, if you're talking about somebody who's really trying to, gain those inches within their training, this is one way to do it, is to stay hydrated. So we don't want that dehydration, in addition to shutting off anabolism and having an impact on our performance. It can make us cramp, it can make us grouchy, it can make us run a little bit hotter. It's not comfortable to it's not comfortable being dehydrated. We get a little bit of brain fog. We're not as sharp. We want to maintain our hydration levels, and caffeine can keep us from doing that. And it's actually interesting because there was a study that showed that caffeinated beverages actually hydrate us in the same way that non-caffeinated beverages do, but the longer, on the back end of it is where we get dehydrated. So if you are dehydrated and you're cramping, you can actually, if you have nothing else, you can drink a soda, like a caffeinated soda, and it will help you get through some of that dehydration. You just got to worry about the back end. Now we've got to get more water and salt and things like that. Just interesting little side note. It promotes sodium losses, which can actually kind of mess with our heart in the way that it beats, which is not a good thing. Caffeine increases our blood pressure. There's actually, within this meta-study, there was 2 instances where a 15 and 16-year-old had aortic ruptures because their blood pressure got so high that their vessels couldn't deal with it anymore, and they had aortic ruptures and died, right? These are 15 and 16-year-old healthy kids. These are not 50, 60, 70, 80-year-olds who are frail and kind of already, starting the process of dying a little bit. They're completely, totally healthy young kids. And again, that's my next note here. There's some evidence to suggest that it can lead to an increased likelihood of arterial ruptures, which is not a good thing. That increased blood pressure is not good, especially in young kids, right? Kids shouldn't have, nobody should have high blood pressure, but these young kids shouldn't be dealing with any of that either. So some of the bad side effects, from a physical standpoint, is it can dehydrate us, it can make us cramp, it can shut off anabolism, which is not a good thing for recovery or while we're training. We don't want to be dehydrated because it's going to have a negative impact on our performance, right? Less water means the electroconductivity of within our body is not quite as good, so we don't get the training stimulus that we want. We're not able to fire muscles the way that we want. All bad things. It can lead to an increase in blood pressure. Obviously, it's going to increase our heart rate, and it's not because it gives us energy. Again, it prohibits us from slowing our heart rate down. So you can get so amped up that you can't get your heart rate down, and that's not good. Some people, depending on how your brain works, that can lead to panic attacks. I've had clients who would have panic attacks when their heart rate got up too high. They would worry about having panic attacks, and then they would throw themselves into one. Not a good thing. So when we're training, staying away from caffeine is honestly actually a good thing. I didn't notice this when I was younger. When I was younger and I was taking this pre-workout and I was taking 300-400 milligrams of caffeine, I thought it was good for me. But as I've gotten older, I've noticed I can amp myself up entirely too much. So I really try to refrain from having caffeine around my training times, especially if I'm doing something that's a higher volume that's already going to get my heart rate up. I don't need to add to that. All right, so again, it's a diuretic. It can dehydrate us. It can shut off that anabolism, put us in a catabolic state. It can increase our blood pressure, increase our heart rate a little bit too much. And again, there's some evidence to show that it can increase the likelihood of arterial ruptures even in young healthy kids. All right, so I didn't want to end this podcast just talking about the horrors of caffeine usage and energy drink usage. There's a lot of benefit. There's a reason why caffeine gets put in all of these energy drinks and pre-workouts and weight loss supplements and all that, and that's because it works. It's been studied. It's probably the second most studied supplement, just behind creatine. Creatine is the most studied supplement on the planet. If you're not using creatine, I have to ask why. There's so many benefits to creatine. This would be another podcast episode. We can talk about this, and I've written about it on the site. But there's essentially zero downfalls to creatine usage, and they're actually finding that it helps benefit cognitive ability in people as well. And they're trying to use it to research, like using in patients with dementia, right? So creatine's got a ton of uses outside the scope of what we're talking about right now. We're talking about caffeine and energy drinks. So caffeine works, right? There's been a ton of studies, and what they found, and this is going to be like a pretty big array of dosages here. They found that anywhere between 3 and 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, right, to be beneficial. That's, for a 150-pound athlete, that's somewhere between 204 and 886 milligrams. That's a pretty big gap. I think so. They didn't run any controls for the amount of caffeine that people were already using within these studies. So what I think probably happened here is you had people who were very regular caffeine, used caffeine on a regular basis, and they were kind of on that upper end, right? So if you're somebody who drinks 300 to 500 milligrams of caffeine a day, it may take that 886 to get you to a place where somebody who doesn't typically drink caffeine is going to get to it 200 milligrams, right? So anywhere from 3 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is going to be the sweet spot for what science says caffeine can benefit you within your play. Now, like I said earlier, there's a lot of bad that caffeine can do too. So it's if you're wanting to use caffeine or these energy drinks as a performance enhancer, as something that truly gives you an edge over your competition, right? You're always going to want to start on that lower end. And so let me preface what I'm about to say with this. I don't think kids need to be drinking caffeine. I think kids have enough energy already. And like I said at the very beginning of this, if you're 15, 16, 17 years old and you need caffeine to function, life is going to be hard. It only gets harder. You only get more tired. I don't think kids should be drinking this. But once you get, your brain's fully done, or not fully, because we don't really fully get done developing in our brain until we're about 26. But, when you're 18, 19, 20, and you can make your own decisions as an adult, and you decide that you want to use caffeine, you would stick between that 3 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight to have positive impacts on your play. Now, with that being said, we still have to worry about the side effects that we talked about earlier, right? So that dehydration, tachycardia, getting too amped up, all those things need to be mitigated, and they can be, but it just has to be well thought out. We can't say, I'm going to take this energy drink for the first time ever before playing a game, because it may not work for you. It may end up putting you in a very bad place. So, benefits to caffeine and energy drinks, they're absolutely there. There's science to support it, but we just need to be careful when we're doing it. And I do not think that it is for kids. I think kids need to learn ways to amp themselves up, whether it's listening to music, getting warmed up, shooting the shit in the locker room with all their athletes, all their teammates. There's a lot of ways that we can get up to play that don't have to include chemicals that they just don't need yet. All right, so caffeine can be beneficial. I don't think it's for kids. All right, so if you can't use energy drinks, what can you do? How can I make sure that I have the energy to play the games that I need to play and train the way that I need to train? And even for some people, just be up the hours that they need to be up during the day and functional and sharp. Well, I would say the biggest thing that you can do, especially for your kids, is make sure that their sleep is where it needs to be. In this gym, I get two very different versions of kids throughout the week. I would say it's probably 50-50, where I get them and they did not sleep well and they are absolute trash in the gym. It's everything that we can do to scale the training session to a place where they can get through it. And at that point, we're not getting better. We're merely getting through it. We're overstimulating. We're probably putting them in a bad position, and that all stems from bad sleep. And the other version of the kids that I get is they had great sleep the night before. They've had a string of good sleep, and they come in and they blow their numbers out of the water. They're setting rep PRs. They're handling heavier weight. They're moving great. They're jumping higher. I mean, there is a pretty serious difference between these two versions of these exact same kids that I get. So I will say try to clean up the sleep. That's a big thing. These kids need 8 hours of sleep. Like, I would say 6 hours minimum, but that's not nearly enough. It needs to be 8 to 10 hours. Their brains are still developing. Their bodies are still developing. They need to be sharp for school. They need to be sharp for sports. They need to be able to stay up throughout the day without reaching for caffeine at the age of 14, 15, 16. And now most of your kids aren't going to like it, but what we need to do is we need to get rid of the screens at night. These kids, when they get home, screens need to go away. They need to not have their phones on them. It turns your brain on. It keeps you from your body from releasing melatonin so that we can start drifting off into sleep. It prohibits your body from being able to fall asleep. Stop with the caffeine, especially late in the day. If you're somebody who has to, think about it this way, you got to get up at 6 in the morning to get to school on time. Let's go back 8 hours. That means you've got to be asleep by 10. If you're taking caffeine before you practice or train at 6, 7 at night, you're not going to be able to fall asleep by the times you need to. So get rid of the caffeine, get rid of the screens, do something physical before you go to bed and eat something heavy. Most of these kids, that kind of bleeds into the next point. Clean up the diet. Most of these kids aren't eating nearly enough. I'd say we have two polar opposites within the athletics field when it comes to youth. We have kids that are overweight and eat too much crap, and then we have kids that complain because they're not getting any bigger, but in reality they don't eat nearly enough. They've got all the signs and symptoms of somebody who's not eating enough even though they think they're eating a ton. That is a total different conversation, but it plays into this one. Clean up the diet. Make sure we're eating enough food. Make sure we're eating the right food. Make sure they're getting enough protein, they're getting enough carbohydrates, they're getting enough healthy fats, right? We can't just eat frozen pizzas and fast food burgers and donuts and candy and soda and energy drinks and expect to perform or even feel good. And I think we've gotten so far away that, as a society, it's bled into our kids. We wonder why there's a 30% rate of obesity in kids or something to that effect. It's absolutely insane. The majority of kids over 50, I think it's closer to 60 or 70 since COVID, % of kids are overweight. And a lot of that deals with the fact that they're up playing video games late, they're up texting their friends late, they're up watching TV late, they're on their phones, they're scrolling through social media, and they're not getting enough sleep, and then they're eating absolute garbage. Garbage in, garbage out. That doesn't mean that when I've got a kid that needs to gain some weight that we can't also throw some ice cream and some very calorically dense foods and things like that, because it is really hard to eat at a caloric surplus, in a clean way. What that means is that can't be the only place that we're getting our food from. We need these healthy fats. We need solid carbohydrates. And also that doesn't mean that we're eating chicken and rice. I don't know where I think bodybuilding did that, where people think that you can gain weight from eating chicken and rice, but you absolutely can't. If I was trying to diet, that's what I would eat. Chicken and rice. They need, potatoes are great. Fattier cuts of beef. Fattier cuts of chicken, eating chicken thighs versus, chicken breast, eating, a New York strip versus a sirloin, making sure that they're getting the proper nutrients in their body and coupling that with good sleep will change the game for so many kids. They won't be walking around like zombies. They won't need energy drinks just to get through the day. So if your kid is somebody who is reaching for that energy drink throughout the day or before a game or before a practice or just needs it to get up in the morning, take a look at these other things. And while it might not be fun, while you might have to be the bad guy, I think it's incredibly important that we set these rules and these kids are in bed by 10 o'clock at night so they get that 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Their screens are taken away. Go for a walk, eat something before you go to bed, and make sure that they're eating the right foods. Those two things will absolutely mitigate the need for any caffeine, especially in a 12 to 18-year-old kid. All right, so to sum up the episode today, we should not be letting our kids drink caffeinated, beverages. For the most part, a soda here or there is okay, but they should not be drinking energy drinks or taking pre-workout or any of those things because they don't need them. There's a lot of benefits to caffeine, or actually, I take that back. There are some benefits to caffeine. I would say the overwhelming majority of the things that happen with caffeine are what we would call drawbacks or bad things. So while it can increase your performance, if not done in the right way, it can absolutely decrease it, and it can put you behind the 8 ball for a lot of things, from developing anxiety disorders, especially when your brain's still developing. I think wiring yourself to function in a high anxiety environment is probably a bad thing for later on in life. So it can make us anxious. It can increase our blood pressure. It can keep us from sleeping. It can keep us from getting tired. It can keep us from recovering. I don't like seeing the kids come in here and drink energy drinks, but I understand why it happens. It's because we're not sleeping well, we're not eating well, and we feel the need for it. We've been told by mass marketing campaigns that like this will give you energy, this will take you to the next level, this will make you better, when in reality like they don't need that. Growing up, I was somebody who I treated my body like a circus for sports supplementation. I tried everything, and it was crazy because I got to the point when I was like 19, 20, 21 where I was needing like 3-4 scoops of NO Explode, which put me at like almost a gram of caffeine, and as I got older, I realized like how detrimental that was. I would say like more than likely all that caffeine making me anxious and all that probably wired me to be a little bit more of an anxious individual. I don't remember being anxious when I was younger, but I'm a high anxiety dude now. That probably played a little bit of a role in it, and I don't want to see that happen to your kids. It can decrease performance. It can increase the probability of anxiety, high blood pressure, tachycardia, all these bad things. So clean up the diets, clean up the sleep, and stop reaching for the energy drinks because it's not beneficial to them. And in reality, like it is probably like it's more than not beneficial. It is bad for them. All right. So this was the first episode we did over the past 3 weeks. It has been a long month. Between the gym, it's kind of getting to that time of year again where we start picking up. So we're preparing for that. We've been preparing the house because our daughter's going to be here in about 4 to 6 weeks, so we had to make sure all that was ready. I've recently started writing for powerliftingtechnique.com, so if you're ever interested in some more like Gen Pop type stuff, I've got about 6 or 7 articles already up over there, and I'll continue writing for them. And then I've started building out the Strength Coach University website. And the more I get into it, the more I think this is going to be like a 4, 5, 6 month long process. So just hold tight. It's coming. And then I'm almost done writing Simple Strength, which is going to be a book that kind of lays out the type of training that we do for our lower training age and moderate training age athletes here at the gym. It's a simple program that you can follow on your own, and that's going to be self-published. It'll be like a Kindle ebook. We may also do the whole print-on-demand thing because if I'm going to write a book, I want to have a copy of it on the shelf. So that's where I've been. That's why we haven't been doing as many of these. So hopefully in the coming weeks, I know once Charlotte, that's what we're going to call her. That's going to be her name, rather. We're not just going to call her that. Once Charlotte gets here, who the hell knows how much time I'm going to have to do this stuff, but I will continue to do it. It just may be that you see it just a little bit more sparingly. All right, so hope everybody has a good week. Hope you learned something about like why you shouldn't let your kids or even yourself drink energy drinks, even though I'm incredibly guilty of it. I know I shouldn't, but I do it, and this was rather like do as I say, not as I do kind of thing, because I do think it's more important for kids not to be taking them, and I understand adults being exhausted and reaching for some caffeine. So hope everybody has a good week. Hope you learned something, and we will see you next time.